In the last chapter, we saw Abram in the role of a warrior, protecting his nephew and his Canaanite allies from imposing kings. And Abram was blessed by a mysterious priestly king, Melchizedek, who gave God credit for Abram's victory in battle, versus the king of Sodom, who encouraged Abram to take what he wanted from the spoils of war. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram. Why does he tell him not to fear? God is walking with Abram, and God sees him in a land of violent kings. He sees Sarai's barren womb. He sees these two people trying to put their hope in the future and looking at their circumstances that look dark. And before they even speak a word, the God that created them anticipates how they'll process these experiences. Sometimes life is scary. Our Maker knows that. He says, "Don't fear. I am your shield and the one who will reward you in great abundance." The reason not to fear is because of who God is and what he will do. And he understands that that's a process with a present and a future. What is a shield? It's presence and protection in battle. Ephesians talks about the shield of faith for believers. It means that when battles do come, we have a defense against flaming arrows. Abram had an earthly fight of flesh and blood, and God was with him in that. But Abram said,
"Oh, sovereign Lord, what will you give me, since I continue to be childless, and my heir is Eliezer of Damascus?"
In that day, if a couple didn't have a biological heir, they could choose a household servant to take care of them later in life and to inherit their estate. Eliezer is that guy.
"Oh, Master Abram, just be content with your circumstances. I mean, what would a son even do with that massive pile of gold? Or with your timeshare on Barbados, or that dumb Maserati you have parked over there? It's really just a massive pile of rubbish."
So Abram is full of doubt, and he goes so far as to question God and provide an alternative plan. Abram added,
"Since you have not given me a descendant, then look, one born in my house will be my heir." Oh, glory, amen, and amen forever.
God is unfazed by the wrestling and blame. That's all a part of the journey of faith. But look, the word of the Lord came to him. "This man will not be your heir.
What?
But instead, a son who comes from your own body will be your heir." The Lord took him outside and said, "Gaze into the sky and count the stars, if you are able to count them." Then he said to him, "So will your descendants be." So it's nighttime, either in the vision or in Abram's reality. It's not clear to me in this chapter when Abram's vision ends. We see some abrupt changes between day and night. Maybe it's meant to recall the evening and morning cycle of Genesis 1. God the Creator is ordering, and his governance of the created realm continues. God uses the stars as another object lesson to prompt Abram's faith. If God made the stars, he can make a multitude of descendants for Abram. Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord considered his response of faith as proof of genuine loyalty. Or your translation might say something like, his faith was credited to him as righteousness. So even in doubt and fear, Abram trusted God. He couldn't see the whole picture, but he'd come far enough with God that he could say, "Okay, I believe that you're with me." So in God's legal declaration, he said, "This man is righteous. He's in the right place." Other voices might say, "Well, what about his doubts? What about his failures? What about when he lied in Egypt and put his wife in danger? What about when he does it again in the future?" Apparently, God is so gracious and so eager to bless that he pretty much puts the bar on the floor and says, "Oh, there's a little mustard seed of trust, you're in. I can work with that." The Lord said to him, "I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess." This phrase will be mirrored in Exodus when God says to Israel, "I am Yahweh your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage," reminding us that God has always been a deliverer who takes people from death to life. But Abram said, "O sovereign Lord, by what can I know that I am to possess it?" He believed, but he still had questions. And God's not rattled or perturbed by questions. So in this case, there's a ritual to confirm the covenant. When two people made a covenant oath, they would cut an animal, and both parties would walk between the pieces. It was a solemn way of saying, "Look, if I don't keep my side of the deal, then may I too be cut into pieces." A sort of swearing on one's life. The Lord said to him, "Take for me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon." So Abram took all these for him and then cut them in two and placed each half opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds in half. When birds of prey came down on the carcasses, so apparently it's day again, Abram drove them away. This little detail piqued my interest. Is this a taste of guarding the garden, like Adam and Eve were supposed to do? Or if this is still part of the vision, does it symbolize Israel driving out its enemies? When the sun went down, so it's at least twilight at this point, Abram fell sound asleep, and great terror overwhelmed him. Then the Lord said to Abram, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign country. They will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I will execute judgment on the nation that they will serve. Afterward, they will come out with many possessions. But as for you, you will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will return here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its limit." That word Amorites probably refers to the various nations and tribes living in the land. Their sin had not reached its limit. That's important for understanding the conquest later in the biblical story. There was never an ethnic reason for Joshua's conquests. It was an issue of sin reaching its limits. Hence, Abram had good relations with Canaanites and was a source of mutual blessing in chapters 14 and 23. Joseph will also channel God's blessing to them in chapter 47. Their sin had not reached its limit, and the limits of sin are, of course, up to God to determine and not us. We saw a similar fullness of evil in the flood story. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. God is patient and merciful, but there does come a breaking point when sin has so thoroughly ruined everything that God has to act in judgment. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, so now it's even later at night, a smoking fire pot with a flaming torch passed between the animal parts. I think this is still part of the vision. God uses these images of fire and light to represent himself. Maybe smoke and fire represent the pillar that would lead Israel through the events in the book of Exodus. God moves between the animals to seal the covenant. Abram is sleeping. The giving of the covenant doesn't depend on him. And then God gives him a fuller picture of what the land promise entails. That day the Lord made a covenant with Abram. "To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates River, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites." So God will give Abram's seed the land of Canaan. This promise will be fulfilled by the end of Joshua. Check it out. "Now I am about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God gave you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one has failed." But before that happened, we get Deuteronomy 2. God goes through a list of other descendants of Abram. The Edomites descended from Esau. The Ammonites and Moabites both descended from Lot. And God says, don't bother them. Don't take from their land, which is part of this whole territory described here. He says, I won't even let you have a footprint of their territory. Why? Because they are also descendants of Abraham. They all get slices of this land. So this isn't about the borders of Israel. As we move through the Bible, the land vision expands, focusing less on geography and more on God's reign being lived out. Check out Psalm 72:8. The future offspring of Abraham will not only inherit Egypt to Euphrates, but the entire earth and land. May he rule from sea to sea, and from the Euphrates to the ends of the earth, not just land expansion, but bringing justice.
He wants to bless the whole world through the seed of Abram. Yes, that much is clear. I just don't see how it's possible.